A museum is an institution that cares for a collection of artifacts and other objects of artistic, cultural, historical, or scientific importance and makes them available for public viewing through exhibits that may be permanent or temporary. Most large museums are located in major cities throughout the world, and more local ones exist in smaller cities, towns, and even the countryside. Museums have varying aims, ranging from serving researchers and specialists to serving the general public. The goal of serving researchers is increasingly shifting to serving the general public. Some of the most attended museums include the Louvre in Paris, the National Museum of China in Beijing, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., the British Museum in London, the National Gallery in London, and the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. There are many types of museums, including art museums, natural history museums, science museums, war museums, and children's museums. As of the 2010s, the continuing acceleration in the digitization of information, combined with the increasing capacity of digital information storage, is causing the traditional model of museums to expand to include virtual exhibits and high-resolution images of their collections that patrons can peruse, study, and explore from any place with Internet. The city with the largest number of museums is Mexico City, with over 128 museums. According to the World Museum Community, there are more than 55,000 museums in 202 countries. Etymology: the English museum comes from the Latin word, and is pluralized as museums. It is originally from the ancient Greek mu omicron upsilon sigma epsilon omicron nu, which denotes a place or temple dedicated to the muses, and hence a building set apart for study and the arts, especially the Museum for Philosophy and Research at Alexandria by Ptolemy I Soter about 280 BCE. The first museum library is considered to be the one of Plato in Athens. However, Pausanias gives another place called museum, namely a small hill in classical Athens opposite the Acropolis. Purpose: the purpose of modern museums is to collect, preserve, interpret, and display items of artistic, cultural, or scientific significance for the education of the public. The purpose can also depend on one's point of view. To a family looking for entertainment on a Sunday afternoon, a trip to a local history museum or large city art museum could be a fun and enlightening way to spend the day. To city leaders, a healthy museum community can be seen as a gauge of the economic health of a city, and a way to increase the sophistication of its inhabitants. Museums are, above all, storehouses of knowledge. In 1829, James Smithson's bequest that would fund the Smithsonian Institution stated he wanted to establish an institution for the increase and diffusion of knowledge. Museums of natural history in the late 19th century exemplified the Victorian desire for consumption and for order, gathering all examples of each classification of a field of knowledge for research and for display was the purpose. As American colleges grew in the 19th century, they developed their own natural history collections for the use of their students. By the last quarter of the 19th century, the scientific research in the universities was shifting toward biological research on a cellular level, and cutting-edge research moved from museums to university laboratories. While many large museums, such as the Smithsonian Institution, are still respected as research centers, research is no longer a main purpose of most museums. While there is an ongoing debate about the purposes of interpretation of a museum's collection, there has been a consistent mission to protect and preserve artifacts for future generations. All museums display objects that are important to a culture. As historian Stephen Kahn writes, to see the thing itself, with one's own eyes and in a public place, surrounded by other people having some version of the same experience, can be enchanting. Museum purposes vary from institution to institution. Some favor education over conservation, or vice versa. For example, in the 1970s, the Canada Science and Technology Museum favored education over preservation of their objects. They displayed objects as well as their functions. One exhibit featured a historic printing press that a staff member used for visitors to create museum memorabilia. Some seek to reach a wide audience, such as a national or state museum, while some museums have specific audiences, like the LDS Church History Museum or local history organizations. Generally speaking, museums collect objects of significance that comply with their mission statement for conservation and display. Although most museums do not allow physical contact with the associated artifacts, there are some that are interactive and encourage a more hands-on approach. Rather than allowing visitors to handle 500-year-old objects, the museum created replicas, as well as replica costumes. The daily activities, historic clothing, and even temperature changes immerse the visitor in a slice of what Tudor life may have been. Most visited museums. This section lists the 20 most visited museums as compiled by AECOM and the Themed Entertainment Association's annual report on the world's most visited attractions. The cities of London, Washington, D.C., and Paris contain most of the 20 most visited museums in the world. History. The Museum of Ancient Times, such as the Museum of Alexandria, would be equivalent to a modern graduate institute. Early museums began as the private collections of wealthy individuals, families or institutions of art and rare or curious natural objects and artifacts. These were often displayed in so-called wonder rooms or cabinets of curiosities. The oldest such museum in evidence was Ennegaldi Nana's Museum, dating from c. 530 BC and devoted to Mesopotamian antiquities. It apparently had sufficient traffic as to warrant labels for the ordered collection, although there is no source for this information. Public access to these museums was often possible for the respectable, especially to private art collections, but at the whim of the owner and his staff. One way that elite men during this time period gained a higher social status in the world of elites was by becoming a collector of these curious objects and displaying them. Many of the items in these collections were new discoveries, and these collectors or naturalists, since many of these people held interest in natural sciences, were eager to obtain them. By putting their collections in a museum and on display, they only got to show their fantastic finds, but they also used the museum as a way to sort and manage the empirical explosion of materials, that wider dissemination of ancient texts, increased travel, voyages of discovery, and more systematic forms of communication and exchange had produced. One of these naturalists and collectors was Uli Soldravandi, whose collection policy of gathering as many objects and facts about them was encyclopedic in nature, a reminiscent of that of Pliny, the Roman philosopher and naturalist. The idea was to consume and collect as much knowledge as possible, to put everything they collected and everything they knew in these displays. In time, however, museum philosophy would change, and the encyclopedic nature of information that was so enjoyed by Aldrovandi and his cohorts would be dismissed, as well as the museums that contained this knowledge. The 18th century scholars of the Age of Enlightenment saw their ideas of the museum as superior, and based their natural history museums and organization and taxonomy, rather than displaying everything in any order after the style of Aldrovandi. While some of the oldest public museums in the world opened in Italy during the Renaissance, the majority of these significant museums in the world opened during the 18th century. The Capitoline Museums, the oldest public collection of art in the world, began in 1471 when Pope Sixtus IV donated a group of important ancient sculptures to the people of Rome. The Vatican Museums, the second oldest museum in the world, traces its origins to the public displayed sculptural collection begun in 1506 by Pope Julius II. The Royal Armouries in the Tower of London is the oldest museum in the United Kingdom. It opened to the public in 1660, though there had been paying privileged visitors to the armouries displays from 1592. Today the museum has 3 sites including its new headquarters in Leeds. Rumphus built a botanical museum in Ambon in 1662, making it the oldest recorded museum in Indonesia. Nothing remains of it except books written by himself, which are now in the library of the National Museum. Its successor was the Batavia Society of Art and Science, established on 24 April 1778. It built a museum and a library, played an important role in research, and collected much material on the natural history and culture of Indonesia. The Amabak Cabinet, originally a private collection, was bought by the University and City of Basel in 1661 and opened to the public in 1671. The Museo des Beaux-Arts et d'Archéologie in Besançon was established in 1694 after Jean-Baptiste Boisset, an abbot, gave his personal collection to the Benedictines of the city in order to create a museum open to the public 2 days every week. The Kunstkammer in St. Petersburg was founded in 1717 in Kikin Hall and officially opened to the public in 1727 in the Old St. Petersburg Academy of Science building. The British Museum in London was founded in 1753 and opened to the public in 1759. Sir Hans Sloane's personal collection of curios provided the initial foundation for the British Museum's collection. The Effete Gallery in Florence. This art collection was begun in the 15th century by Cosimo de' Medici, enlarged by his descendants, and in 1743 bequeathed by the last heir of the House of Medici, to the people of Tuscany and to all nations. The Effete Palace was designed by the Renaissance painter and architect Giorgio Vasari. The top floors were converted to gallery space, open to visitors on request, and then opened to the public as a museum in 1769 by Grand Duke Peter Leopold. The Museum of the History of Rieger and Navigation is the oldest in Latvia and the whole of the Baltics, and one of the oldest in Europe. It was founded and opened to public in 1773 by the Rieger Town Council as Himsel Museum. The rich and diverse collections of the museum originated from an art and natural sciences collection of Nicolaus von Himsel, a Rieger doctor. Today the Museum of the History of Rieger and Navigation collections number more than 500,000 items, systematized in about 80 collections. The Hermitage Museum was founded in 1764 by Catherine the Great and has been open to the public since 1852. The Museo del Prado in Madrid was founded in 1785 by Charles III of Spain and was opened to the public for the first time in 1819. The Belvedere Palace of the Habsburg monarchs in Vienna opened with a collection of art in 1781. The Tellers Museum in Haarlem established in 1778 and is the oldest Dutch museum. The Louvre Museum in Paris, also a former royal palace, opened to the public in 1793. The Kintel National Museum, erected in the late 18th century in Sibiu, Transylvania, Romania, housed in the palace of Samuel von Brukenthal, who was Habsburg governor of Transylvania and who established its first collections around 1790. The collections were officially opened to the public in 1817, making it the oldest institution of its kind in Romania. The Museum of the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia dates to 1743, making it the oldest museum in the United States. The Charleston Museum was established in 1773, thereby making it the first museum in the southern United States. It did not open to the public until 1824. Charles Wilson Peale established America's first public museum in 1786 in Philadelphia's Independence Hall in 1786. It closed by the 1840s. Indian Museum, Kolkata, established in 1814, is the oldest museum in India. It has a collection of 646 artifacts. Modern museums. The first public museums were often accessible only by the middle and upper classes. It could be difficult to gain entrance. When the British Museum opened to the public in 1759, it was a concern that large crowds could damage the artifacts. Prospective visitors to the British Museum had to apply in writing for admission, and small groups were allowed into the galleries each day. The British Museum became increasingly popular during the 19th century, amongst all age groups and social classes who visited the British Museum, especially on public holidays. The Ashmolean Museum, however, founded in 1677 from the personal collection of Elias Ashmole, was set up in the University of Oxford to be open to the public and is considered by some to be the first modern public museum. The collection included that of Elias Ashmole, which he had collected himself, including objects he had acquired from the gardeners, travelers and collectors John Tredescant the elder and his son of the same name. The collection included antique coins, books, engravings, geological specimens, and zoological specimens, one of which was the stuffed body of the last dodo ever seen in Europe, but by 1755 the stuffed dodo was so moth-eaten that it was destroyed, except for its head and one claw. The museum opened on 24 May 1683, with naturalist Robert Plot as the first keeper. The first building, which became known as the Old Ashmolean, is sometimes attributed to Sir Christopher Wren or Thomas Wood. In France, the first public museum was the Louvre Museum in Paris, opened in 1793 during the French Revolution, which enabled for the first time free access to the former French royal collections for people of all stations and status. The fabulous art treasures collected by the French monarchy over centuries were accessible to the public 3 days each decade. The Conservatoire du Muséum National des Arts was charged with organizing the Louvre as a national public museum and the centerpiece of a planned national museum system. As Napoleon I conquered the great cities of Europe, confiscating art objects as he went, the collections grew, and the organizational task became more and more complicated. After Napoleon was defeated in 1815, many of the treasures he had amassed were gradually returned to their owners. His plan was never fully realized, but his concept of a museum as an agent of nationalistic fervor had a profound influence throughout Europe. American museums eventually joined European museums as the world's leading centers for the production of new knowledge in their fields of interest. A period of intense museum building, in both an intellectual and physical sense, was realized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While many American museums, both natural history museums and art museums alike, were founded with the intention of focusing on the scientific discoveries and artistic developments in North America, many moved to emulate their European counterparts in certain ways. Drawing on Michel Foucault's concept of liberal government, Tony Bennett has suggested the development of more modern 19th-century museums was part of new strategies by Western governments to produce a citizenry that, rather than be directed by coercive or external forces, monitored and regulated its own conduct. As such, objects and artifacts, particularly those related to high culture, became instruments for these new tasks of social management. Universities became the primary centers for innovative research in the United States, well before the start of the Second World War. Nevertheless, museums to this day contribute new knowledge to their fields and continue to build collections that are useful for both research and display.